Hey everybody, and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens. In this, our 40th session, can you believe it? We've made it 40 sessions in the Dear Mr. Potter series. We delve into the re-emergence of Death Eaters in the Wizarding world and the actual, more literal emergence of above the Quidditch World Cup. The ongoing conflict between magic and muggle worlds will be a major theme in our discussion this week, and we have a lot of material to cover as we look at chapters 9, 10, and 11 of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. The chat is already jumping today. It is wonderful to have you all here with me, including Aaron and Merlin's Beard and Cecily and Tension and Cornflake Girl, all of whom are, I think, joining us for the first time. I think that's everyone who is joining us for the first time today. Guys, it is great to have you here. And also, a welcome back to Perspicuous Enigma, who hasn't joined us in quite some time, but is joining us now in the Crowdcast chat. It is lovely to have you all here alongside Gildarts Winters and Vikiti Plybon. Is that the first time that you're joining us? I think it is. I don't think I recognize your name. And Michaela is joining us for the first time too. Wow, you guys, it is great to have you all here. This is why I love running these afternoon sessions from time to time for Dear Mr. Potter, because it just opens up the whole world to join our discussions here. You are all free to join us from I know Denmark and other European places and Brazil and other places south of the equator and wonderful other foreign climes. So it is wonderful to have you all here. Thank you all so much for joining me. Before we get into our discussion this week, though, a slightly sadder note must interrupt proceedings. I was enormously saddened to learn yesterday of the death of Ursula K. Le Guin, who, of course, we discussed very recently here in the Dear Mr. Potter podcast in the context of her first Earthsea novel, A Wizard of Earthsea. As I've said many times over the course of the last few months, Ursula K. Le Guin was an absolute giant of 20th century fantasy literature, 21st century fantasy literature too, as well as being a fierce and ferocious commentator on matters political and social. The world is dimmer without her. I'm also now, I think, taking this opportunity to pledge an ongoing discussion of at least the Earthsea novels. I think that we were planning a brief interregnum between the 4th and 5th Harry Potter novels when we might look at some British boarding school adventure stories. I thought it would be really interesting to take a look at that side of J.K. Rowling's inspiration there, take a look at that side of the influential tapestry that led to the Harry Potter series. And I still think that that would be extremely valuable, but also I think now would be an excellent time for us to delve into The Tombs of Atuan, the second book in the Earthsea series. Stay tuned for more information about that. Ursula K. Le Guin, we will miss you. The world is, as I say, dimmer without her, sadly. So that's, unfortunately, a bleak note upon which to begin this week's reading. Though, of course, we should all be so fortunate as to leave behind a body of work like Le Guin's. We'll continue to talk about her books for many, many years to come, and she will continue to stand alongside the greats of fantasy storytelling in the 20th century. I was very pleased to see renowned Tolkien scholar Michael Drout, who I've mentioned before in the context of the There and Back Again podcast series, one of the great Tolkien scholars currently working today. I saw him on Twitter making a well-observed comment, I think, that Le Guin really does stand alongside Tolkien as the greatest influencer of fantasy storytelling in the 20th century. So it's good to see that even now her legacy is being well regarded and well respected. And we will, of course, here at Point North Media continue to look into that legacy as we go forward. So that's our sad note to begin today's session. Let's talk about wizard money, shall we? Let's talk a little bit about wizard money, because I've had a lot of emails and tweets and forum messages over at pointnorthmedia.com/forum about Fred and George's bet. And to understand Fred and George's bet at the Quidditch World Cup, we have to spend a little bit of time, probably more time than J.K. Rowling did, I have to say, thinking about wizard money and how it works, because there isn't a ready translation for wizard money. It isn't immediately clear and transparent to the reader of this book what exactly Fred and George bet. Let me close this slide here so that you can see me a little more fully here. Let me begin by reading the quote from last week's reading. "We bet 37 galleons, 15 sickles, 3 newts," said Fred, as he and George quickly pooled all their money. "That Ireland win, but Victor Crumb gets the snitch. Oh, and we'll throw in a fake wand." And then there's a little back and forth. And Ludo Bagman says, "Excellent, I haven't seen one that convincing in years. I'd pay 5 galleons for that." This gives us a grand wager here of 42 galleons, 15 sickles, and 3 newts. Now, J.K. Rowling has asserted that it is the case that a galleon is worth approximately 5 British pounds, though even she kind of qualified that, saying more or less the exchange rate varies enormously. I'm not sure why there would be an exchange rate even between galleons and British pounds, but there it is. Okay, so more or less 5 British pounds, says J.K. Rowling. Fred and George therefore gamble around £220 in 1994 money, or about $570 in 2018 money. which is a significant amount of cash. Certainly, it seems likely that Fred and George could have earned that amount over the summer holiday here, over the vacation so far, in that they can, continue to sell jokes and tricks and what have you through their mail order pamphlets. That doesn't seem implausible, but it also doesn't seem like quite enough. And those numbers don't quite match up with the accounts that we get from other sources. I'm going to credit, in fact, let me drop this link here into the Crowdcast chat so that you guys can go and check this out, because I am indebted to a Reddit user called Obie is my homie, who did a more careful analysis of the various prices in the Harry Potter novels, a comprehensive analysis of the various prices that are given to us in the Harry Potter novels, and offered a quick conversion that feels more true, more intuitively correct, rather than the $13 that J.K. Rowling asserted was the equivalent exchange, $13 in 2018 money, that is the equivalent exchange for 1 galleon in 1994. This analysis suggests that a galleon is actually worth closer to $25 in today's money, meaning that Fred and George bet about $1,100 on the outcome of the match. That means, just to put this in context, that the Daily Prophet Grand Prize, which funded the Weasley family trip to Egypt, which I'm sure you'll all recall, was worth around $17,500. It means that Harry spent around $750 on the Omnioculars at the World Cup, which explains a little bit about why he told Ron that he wasn't getting a Christmas present for the next 10 years. $750 for 3 pairs of Omnioculars, even given the markup that you get at sporting events or concerts or whatever, that seems like quite a lot of money. It means that Harry paid about $175 or 7 galleons for his wand at Ollivander's back in the first book, and Ludo Bagman inexplicably paid Fred and George $125, that is 5 galleons, for their fake wand. A fake wand worth 5/7 of Harry's very, very good wand. That's surprising, particularly because we suspect, at least, that Harry's wand is a top-of-the-line model. The Weasleys, when they were trying to outfit the whole family in Chamber of Secrets, managed to rustle up $70 to $80 from their vault at Gringotts, with which they are able to outfit the entire family for the school year. So it seems as though, let's say, Ginny's first-year wand is probably a lot cheaper than Harry's, top-of-the-line fancy wand. That, I think, is what we can assert to be true. So we know that Fred and George are wagering around $1,100 at the Quidditch World Cup. And that, A, feels like a lot of money, and B, does not get us any closer to understanding what they win, theoretically, from Ludo Bagman. We should just kind of put a little flag in this and say, I'm going to spoiler a couple of very minor beats from the end of the book. I hope that is okay. They don't actually get their money from Ludo Bagman. They don't even get their original wager returned from Ludo Bagman, but they do come into possession of something like $25,000 in today's money right at the end of the book. That will enable them to start their joke shop. That tells us, because their wager, even when they think that they are going to get their money from Ludo, they are not yet ready to start their shop. There's still more investment required in order to do that. They don't clear the bar that they clear pretty definitively right at the end of the book. That tells us categorically that the odds of Ireland winning the match but Victor Crumb getting the snitch, the odds there that Ludo Bagman offers them are somewhat less than 24 to 1. So it is not by any means a long shot. I mean, it's a pretty long shot, theoretically. Even if we say that the odds of Ireland winning and Crumb getting the snitch are 20 to 1, that's still quite a long shot, but it is not the hundreds or thousands or million to 1 shot that may be implied by the book. We can be pretty confident here that Fred and George are gambling, yes, in both the literal and the metaphorical senses, but aren't quite extending themselves as recklessly as it may seem. And of course, it's easier to be a little reckless with your money when you have a defined goal in mind, when you are possessed of the character and personality of Fred and George Weasley, I suppose is the nicest way that I can put it, and when you can continue to live at home. Even if they had lost all of that money, even if this gamble had not paid off, they would have been just fine. They still have a place in the world. It's not as though they're gambling the security of their family. This is still, indulgence money at this point. And that got me thinking about the math of Quidditch and how often a seeker from a losing team catches the snitch and ends the match. And it must be fairly common. I mean, it's not in any way a part of our understanding of Quidditch as it's been presented to us thus far, but it must come up from time to time. If your team is behind by more than 100 points, then it seems logical that a seeker, particularly a seeker of Victor Crumb's talent and desire for fame, is going to go after the snitch, because at that point the match is all but over and the margin is presumably only going to increase. Clawing back that loss is going to be more difficult. The other thing that's really interesting, if we're looking at the math of the Quidditch World Cup, is that when this event is introduced to us as potentially running for days, the last one we were told ran for 5 days, which seems like a shocking amount of time, which has always parenthetically been one of the interesting things about a Quidditch match, is that it could just last forever. Like, it could just go on and on and on. If no one ever gets the snitch, then presumably there's some other means of drawing a Quidditch match to a close, but I'm not entirely certain how that process works out. While the last match lasted for 5 days, an analysis of the text suggests that this match lasted for an hour, maybe. So that means that some wizards camped out for 2 weeks out in the British countryside in order to watch a match that lasted for an hour. I guess that's just how Quidditch goes. When you're a wizard, you live in the wizarding world and you live by their rules. So that's our brief tangent into money and matters mathematical. We are going to now get into our reading. Let me see as I catch up with the Crowdcast chat. It Don't Connect says, it's weird that one player on a team has the power to just completely end the game. And I wonder about the rest of the Bulgarian team, right? I wonder, everyone else kind of, okay, this makes sense. Everyone else is able to see at least Victor's reasoning, though notably, as we discussed last time, it is Harry, out of our little power trio, Harry understands Victor's reasoning and the exceptionalism that is embedded within that worldview, whereas Ron, team player, Team Hufflepuff that he is, doesn't quite understand why you would undercut the rest of your team the way that Victor Crumb does. Why wouldn't you just urge your team forward to close the gap and make the capture of the snitch actually significant in terms of the outcome of the game? That, I think, is explained pretty nicely with regard to their personality types. Hermione, I suppose, would also be arguing the logical position. Hermione, presumably in her Ravenclaw guise, would be arguing the logical position that the match is already over. If you've been playing for an hour and you are already more than 100 points behind, then, good luck. Good luck. You might as well catch the snitch and end the game. You might as well end this farce before those numbers get even higher and the gap gets even wider and it becomes even less likely that you're going to make any kind of impact on the history of Quidditch as a sport. So Victor Crumb's actions, not team-oriented, but highlighting very beautifully, I think, the division between Quidditch as a team sport and a solo sport for exceptional individuals. Yeah. As Will says, I feel like Crumb is the kind of guy who would already be ready and willing to point out to his angry team that he's the only one who did his job during the game. Yeah, I think that might be exactly it. Crumb's exceptionalism, and again, just to kind of bracket this, I think Crumb's exceptionalism is beautifully highlighted before we ever really get to know him as a character. Minor spoilers for next week's reading, but he's going to be around, and that very exceptionalism is essential to our understanding of Crumb as a character. He is used to being a hero, to being someone who stands outside of his company and his community and his context in exactly the same, well, okay, not in exactly the same way, in a very similar way to Harry Potter himself. So it makes sense that we're highlighting that exceptionalism here. As I said last time, as I'll continue to say as we move through Goblet of Fire, and presumably as we continue to talk about Quidditch less frequently in the rest of the series than we have previously, but as we continue to talk about Quidditch, I will point out that the Quidditch World Cup works beautifully as a narrative exercise. Without having to carry the actual mechanical weight of the story, Quidditch's lunacy doesn't bother me at all. It works brilliantly just as a spectacle in the context of the Quidditch World Cup. Let me see here as we're catching up. Minor spoilers is one of my favorite phrases on this podcast, says Fina. I do my best. I do my best not to spoil, primarily so that we can stay focused on where we are in the narrative. For example, this week, we're going to have the tangential introduction of a character who will actually be introduced next week. Next week, by the way, a huge reading. Next week, we get some incredibly important characters and elements of the wizarding world introduced to us, and there will be a temptation while we're discussing those things to spin out and start talking about the very last book in the series and to start delving into the history, the actual textual history, and then the Pottermore adjacent history of the wizarding world. And those things, those discussions are not without value. They're certainly not without interest. Goodness knows, if you've spent a long evening over drinks talking about Harry Potter, then you know how fascinating this world can be and how relentless those conversations can be. But what they will inevitably do is pull our focus away from the text that's in front of us. They will pull our focus away from the actual unfolding of the story. It would perhaps be possible to do some kind of some kind of combined approach where we're looking at Harry Potter in its entirety as well as looking at the unfolding story on the page in front of us, but that would take far, far longer. Perhaps we'll circle back around and do the entire series again after we've finished up book 7 in this particular run of Dear Mr. Potter. We'll go all the way back to the beginning and talk about talk about Philosopher's Stone, We'll talk about Philosopher's Stone in the context of all that we have learned in the rest of the series. Maybe. I can't imagine that a year and a half, 2 years from now, when we're actually done with Deathly Hallows, I can't imagine that will mark the end of my fascination with Harry Potter. I can't imagine that I will conclude that book or conclude our discussion of the movie and then say, and that's that. I'll never talk about Harry Potter again in public. Doesn't seem likely. Doesn't seem like something I would do. I will probably think of more things to say between now and then, and I hope that you all will too. Let's get into our reading then, because as I say, we've got quite a lot of material to cover, though our second chapter tonight is extremely brief, at least blessedly brief, but we have to get to all the stuff we didn't cover last week. We have to get to the dark mark, and we begin with Harry waking in the night as I share this first slide with you all here. Here we are. And I cancel that little warning that Google kindly gives me right there at the bottom of my screen. Harry did as he was told and hurried out of the tent, Ron at his heels. By the light of the few fires that were still burning, he could see people running away into the woods, fleeing something that was moving across the field toward them, something that was emitting odd flashes of light and noises like gunfire. Loud jeering, roars of laughter and drunken yells were drifting toward them. Then came a burst of strong green light which illuminated the scene. A crowd of wizards, tightly packed and moving together with wands pointing straight upward, was marching slowly across the field. Harry squinted at them. They didn't seem to have faces. Then he realized their heads were hooded and their faces masked. High above them, floating along in midair, 4 struggling figures were being contorted into grotesque shapes. It was as though the masked wizards on the ground were puppeteers, and the people above them were marionettes operated by invisible strings that rose from the wands into the air. 2 of the figures were very small. More wizards were joining the marching group, laughing and pointing up at the floating bodies. Tents crumpled and fell as the marching crowd swelled. Once or twice, Harry saw one of the marchers blast a tent out of his way with his wand. Several caught fire. The screaming grew louder. The floating people were suddenly illuminated as they passed over a burning tent, and Harry recognized one of them, Mr. Roberts, the campsite manager. The other 3 looked as though they might be his wife and children. One of the marchers below flipped Mrs. Roberts upside down with his wand. Her nightdress fell down to reveal voluminous drawers, and she struggled to cover herself up as the crowd below her screeched and hooted with glee. "That's sick," Ron muttered, watching the smallest muggle child who had begun to spin like a top 60 feet above the ground, his head flopping limply from side to side. "That is really sick." Confirmed. I agree. I am inclined to agree with you, Ronald Weasley, and your assessment of matters here. As Heroes and Bards says in the chat here, this scene was deeply disturbing to tiny child me, and to me as, big adult me. This is incredibly dark, and its darkness is so stark and significant that it is really tempting to withdraw from it. It is really tempting, I think, to refuse to engage with the actual substance of this chapter. It is almost tempting to view the narrative voice as offering us something of a buffer between the actual events that are transpiring here around the Quidditch World Cup and our inevitable conclusion drawn upon those events, the interpretation of those events. This is enormously dark, enormously significant, and marks a new turn in the plot of Harry Potter. This is the intrusion of something far more significant than Voldemort, than the influence of the Death Eaters, the influence of Voldemort's cabal of dark wizards, right? This is something far worse than the tangled schoolboy loyalties of the Marauders, or even the betrayal of Peter Pettigrew and Sirius Black, the kind of the betrayal of one's personal quasi-familial connection of Peter Pettigrew and the betrayal of Sirius Black by the wizarding world in general. We've seen those kinds of personal dramas play out within this frame before, but this is something else entirely. The March of the Death Eaters, we don't have the name for them yet, but we'll get it before the end of this chapter, so I don't mind spoiling that reveal. The March of the Death Eaters through the camp here, the tormenting of the Muggles who have been attending unwillingly to, the wizard encampment here. We mustn't forget that Mr. Roberts has had his memory wiped 10 times a day over the course of the last couple of weeks because he's now so resistant to the tsunami of impossible spectacle that is greeting him every time he steps out of his front door. He's getting his mind wiped. So it's not as though he is entirely innocent here, not innocent in the sense that he has done something. Okay, let me clarify this a little. He is not innocent in the sense that he has done something wrong. He is not innocent in the sense that the wizard world has already touched manipulated, overwhelmed, overshadowed, occupied him. We talked last time about the morality of these memory charms and whether or not the casual use, the reckless use, the somewhat prosaic and frustrated use of the Obliviate spell was in any way moral. I have my concerns about that for obvious reasons and the removal of Mr. Roberts' agency here, but this is something else entirely. The devil, though, as always, is in the detail. So we get this description of the Muggles, the Roberts family, hanging in the air as the Death Eaters are pursuing, and we see the casual application of violence as we are sweeping tents out of the way, and some of them catch fire. And then we get more wizards were joining the marching group, laughing and pointing up at the floating bodies. Tents crumpled and fell as the marching crowd swelled. Once or twice, Harry saw one of the marchers blast a tent out of his way with his wand. Several caught fire. The screaming grew louder. As Jin says here in the Crowdcast chat, I mean, I think this is all meant to be evocative of lynching, tarring, and feathering. Yes, completely, right? That is exactly the, I hesitate to even say metaphor, right? It's not even shrouded in an adequate metaphor. That is literally what we are seeing happen here. We are seeing a kind of perverted mob mentality sweep across this community. And one of the starkest and most bleak aspects of this are the other wizards following in. These wizards, not hooded and masked the way that the Death Eaters are, they're just joining in this mob mentality. They are joining in this public display of what? Wizard superiority over Muggles? That's not a thing that anyone in the wizard world has to have proved to them, right? This is merciless. This is a demonstration of power and a demonstration of aggression that is, as demonstrations of power and demonstrations of aggression so often do, is actively and immediately recruiting support. There are some people who will just side with the loudest voice, regardless of what use that voice is being put to, regardless of what action is being taken. Some people will just side with the mob. Not everyone, crucially. Ron, as ever, giving us the heart of our power trio here at the end. So if the March of the Death Eaters is bad and the ongoing and immediate recruitment of other wizards to this cause, the kind of this rambunctious celebration, I noted too, as I was describing this, look at that second paragraph there. Loud jeering, roars of laughter, and drunken yells were drifting toward them. Then came a burst of strong green light which illuminated the scene. Drunken yells seems particularly stark. It seems particularly adult, seems particularly dangerous in this context. This isn't just festivities gone awry, right? This isn't just jubilation and exuberance gone too far. There is something darker at the heart of this, even before the Death Eaters were introduced to the narrative, even before we understand what it is that they're actually doing. There is a sense in which spirits have turned. Something has gone bad here. Something has gone very wrong indeed. And then we get the reference to Mrs. Roberts, presumably Mr. Roberts' female companion here. One of the marchers below flipped Mrs. Roberts upside down with his wand. Her nightdress fell down to reveal voluminous drawers, and she struggled to cover herself up as the crowd below her screeched and hooted with glee. This is a particularly stark and offensive piece of manipulation here. This is a kind of exposure, a kind of ruthless aggression designed to elicit exactly, I'm sure, the response that it gets. And when I said earlier that the narrative almost seems to be pulling back, the narrative almost doesn't want to engage with this in kind of mimicry, in imitation of our reluctance to engage with what is really happening here and what is really unfolding on the page in front of us. That reference to voluminous drawers, right? That feels like a Dursley beat. That feels like something that would have happened to Aunt Marge. You know, she gets inflated and floats away, and we get a reference to her voluminous drawers. That seems like it would be completely appropriate, or not completely appropriate, but it would have been completely consistent with that kind of grotesque and fantastical response to a character who is herself somewhat fantastical and grotesque, right? We should be encouraged to laugh and to mock this character, which, as we've said before, we have done with the Dursleys on a pretty consistent basis ever since their introduction. Now, the Dursleys are entirely different. The Dursleys are a matter apart because they are making constant and consistent decisions to be utterly odious. So when they are ridiculed, when they are confronted, when they are dominated, when they are made fearful, calling back to Mr. Weasley breaking through the fireplace, of course, when they are made fearful, we are generally on the other side. We may not be pointing and laughing, but we do feel at least as though some justice has come to them. But I mentioned back when we were discussing that scene, the emergence of the Weasleys into number 4 Privet Drive at the beginning of this book, that this is going to take on a different texture later in the story. And this is the point at which all of our interactions with Muggles now read differently, now feel a little different. When we know that we're building to this, those more casual, those more, more comedic interactions feel a little less pleasant, a little less well-intentioned, a little less forgivable, honestly, or at least they do to me. Yeah. Let me see as I try and catch up. Yes, exactly right. Alexis putting her finger on it perfectly. These passages give me the sick feeling that I get when I see the neo-Nazi alt-right stuff in the news. And you guys, I wish that J.K. Rowling had not been as prescient as it turns out that she was when writing this story and writing, honestly, the rest of the series, because we are now dealing with things in the very real world which would have been absurd, would have felt outlandish even when these books were written. And yes, this mob mentality, this desire to delineate us and them, right, let's ask the big question here. Why are the Muggles being tormented like this? Why are they being exposed to public ridicule like this? Why are they being abused and assaulted like this? Well, because Muggles aren't like us. This is a part we know already of Lord Voldemort's philosophy, and certainly the philosophy of the Death Eaters and his followers, his cadre of dark wizards here. We know why this is happening, and it does exactly what this kind of identity politics does in the real world. When you draw that line and you say, well, these people, they're not like us. Like, they're not human. They're subhuman, and therefore we get to objectify them. We get to treat them however we see fit. Some people are going to respond to that positively. Some people are going to find that reassurance of their own identity to be somewhat gratifying. They're going to feel included because now we're all banded together on this side of the line, and the people on the other side of the line, well, who cares about them? They're not our people. They're not like us. We are not bound by the same rules of morality. Well, of course, we would never treat a wizard like this, but they're just Muggles. This is hilarious. Did you see her voluminous drawers? I want to express in the strongest possible terms just how bad everything that is happening on this page is, which, like, I know, I understand that you all understand how bad this is. Like, no one is reading this and thinking, well, you know, the Death Eaters, just larks, just high spirits. But what is significant here is not the actual actions that are taken by the Death Eaters. It's partly the corresponding lack of reaction from most of the other characters present in this scene. Not our named characters. Most of our named characters fall on the good side of the line, are decent and good-hearted people. That's as it should be. Though even then, most of our characters are falling on the juvenile side of the line. And as we discussed in Prisoner of Azkaban, kind of already engaged in a kind of, what have you got, adolescent rebellion, right? And that's not to say that there aren't huge problems with the wizarding world. There absolutely are. There is rank injustice in the wizarding world. So of course our adolescent characters are pushing back against it. All I'm saying is that adolescent characters are more primed for that kind of free rebellion than characters who are already invested in the status quo. Characters like Mr. Weasley, which in a very powerful sense makes Arthur's rejection of this kind of behavior all the more virtuous, all the more deserving of our respect and applause, I suppose. Much, much more on all of this later. So we are objectifying the Muggles. We are absolutely crossing the line. We are engaged in the kind of tyranny which has been spoken of in hushed tones with regard to the First Wizarding War and the ongoing rulership, the ongoing oppression of Lord Voldemort back in the day. This is something new for us, certainly also new for us within the frame of Harry Potter, right? This isn't a one-shot kind of evil. This isn't Lucius Malfoy kind of brooding and being sly and awful in the shadows. This is outright aggression. And this isn't even all of it. This isn't even everything that we're going to cover. Gosh, you guys are being so smart here. Yes, Michelle Schock says here, we wouldn't treat a wizard like this, quoting me. What about non-pure-blooded wizards and their sympathizers? Well, we've already established that, right? We've already got a pattern for how we treat, forgive me, mudbloods in the wizarding world, or at least how the old pureblood families treat mudbloods. And of course, it is often said, I think, that book 4, the Goblet of Fire specifically, is about prejudice and intolerance and these kinds of inequalities, systematic inequalities and personal inequalities, right? But this goes all the way back to the very beginning. You can see reflections of this essential conflict in the very beginning of the very first book, when we're talking about Vernon Dursley going through the world and being blind to the wizarding world. There is a judgment there. There is a prejudice there that is now being brought into the light of gray, or the light of day, excuse me, or the green light of spellcasting and spellcraft. Yeah, it's pretty awful. Let's keep pushing forward though, and we get to, well, hey, let's look actually at the way in which this new kind of evil clashes with an old kind of evil, because out there in the forest, who should we find but Draco Malfoy? Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned sharply. Draco Malfoy was standing alone nearby, leaning against a tree, looking utterly relaxed. His arms folded, he seemed to have been watching the scene at the campsite through a gap in the trees. Ron told Malfoy to do something that Harry knew he would never have dared say in front of Mrs. Weasley. Language, Weasley, said Malfoy, his pale eyes glittering. Hadn't you better be hurrying along now? You wouldn't like her spotted, would you? He nodded at Hermione, and at the same moment, a blast like a bomb sounded from the campsite, and a flash of green light momentarily lit the trees around them. What's that supposed to mean? Said Hermione defiantly. Granger, they're after muggles, said Malfoy. Do you want to be showing off your knickers in midair? Because if you do hang around, they're moving this way, and it would give us all a laugh. Hermione's a witch, Harry snarled. Have it your own way, Potter, said Malfoy, grinning maliciously. If you think they can't spot a mudblood, stay where you are. You watch your mouth, shouted Ron. Everyone present knew that mudblood was a very offensive term for a witch or wizard of muggle parentage. Never mind, Ron, said Hermione quickly, seizing Ron's arm to restrain him as he took a step toward Malfoy. There came a bang from the other side of the trees that was louder than anything they had heard. Several people nearby screamed. Malfoy chuckled softly. The presence of Draco Malfoy in this scene, not just, of course, relentlessly odious, not just actually and specifically awful, but also representative of exactly what I was just discussing, the roots of this outright hostility against muggles and their kind, even half-bred muggle-born wizards. This has deep roots that go into the very social constructs and conventions that underpin Harry Potter's experience at Hogwarts, that underpin the wizarding world, that, as I say, go all the way back to the very beginning of the very first book. This is a conflict that has been, well, if not brewing, a conflict that has existed in a suspended and tense state for quite some time. What Draco is also doing here is representing the spread of power and the ways in which the powerless are willing and eager to surrender themselves to a cause in exchange for power, right? They are willing and eager to band together on that one side of the line. Once you draw the line and you delineate two populations, you know, us and them, some people will side happily with the us just because there is comfort and there is safety and there is identity, which is crucial and should not be de-emphasized, and because there is power there. Now, Draco Malfoy, of course, represents old power, but he has been, for the last 3 books, in a state of diminished power. Yes, the Malfoys are, I was going to say a respectable wizarding family, not true, actually, but are at least a extremely powerful wizarding family. They are old money in the British aristocratic sense, right? They are now living in a more modern world where that influence has waned. There are suspicions being cast about the Malfoys right back from the opening moments of the first book, right? Our introduction to Draco Malfoy kind of comes with some of those assertions. They're bad news, they're trouble, and certainly once we get to meet Lucius Malfoy, we see that all the more clearly. But now we are seeing that side being empowered, that these old grievances, these old aggressions, these old acts and desires of violence have not abated. Lucius Malfoy, Draco Malfoy, did not change when Voldemort, well, Draco wasn't around. I want to be very clear about how I kind of lay this out. The Malfoy instinct to violence and dominance did not abate when Voldemort was cast down. It was only ever held in abeyance. There was never real social healing at a deep, deep level in the wake of the First Wizarding War. And let's all put a pin in that, because that's going to be incredibly significant as we move through the very end of this book and into Order of the Phoenix 2, of course. There are cracks in the firmament of the wizarding world that are now being exposed. And what I love about this is that none of these cracks is appearing now for the first time. What makes the violence that we are witnessing here at the Quidditch World Cup so stark is not that it has emerged from nowhere. And no one would have blamed J.K. Rowling for getting to book 4 and thinking, okay, now we're pivoting to more adult material. Okay, let's introduce a conflict. Let's introduce a super powerful conflict. This conflict has been there from the beginning. This conflict has been there from the first book. This conflict is with us through Tom Riddle, through the treatment of Hermione, through, as I say, the politics and legalistic appearances of the third book. this has been present from the beginning and has just been waiting for its realization, for its voice here. And now we have it. And I know that I'm emphasizing powerfully just how bad this is, but boy howdy, it's pretty bad. Let me see here. I saw someone. Yes, we're talking about Harry stepping in. Oh, the Crowdcast chat is out of hand. I'm going to try and bracket this as best I can. Is there a question over Harry interceding on Hermione's behalf here? Well, okay. First of all, let's observe the singularly unpleasant and brutal threat to Hermione here. As bad as it is in the previous slide, when Mrs. Roberts is suspended in air and we get the reference to voluminous drawers here, that's bad, okay? And that's a character that we don't know. But then we're turning to Hermione. Hermione, who is in a very vulnerable position within Wizarding Society because of exactly the kinds of assertions that Draco Malfoy has made before and makes again here. These mudblood assertions about Hermione's purpose and role and right to be a part of the Wizarding world. That is personal and completely, comprehensively despicable. To couple that with something that is, if not an outright threat of sexual assault, and it is, I think, an outright threat of sexual assault, but even if your reading of that particular threat doesn't go that far and you are still preserving this kind of this distance from the events that are unfolding before us, Granger the Rafter Muggles, said Malfoy, do you want to be showing off your knickers in midair? Because if you do, hang around, they're moving this way and it would give us all a laugh. This objectification of Hermione's physical presence, of her body and her sexuality and her gender identity and her personhood. Like, there is not a way in which this is not the most despicable and degrading thing that Draco Malfoy has said to date. I know for many readers, this specifically is the point at which he crosses the line, where he goes from being kind of roguish in a high school, you know, he's the bad guy in high school, but it'll maybe come good in the end kind of way, to, oh no, you are just the worst. You are just actual, you know, scum here. This is very bad. And there is certainly a reading here too of Harry's interposition as being somewhat patriarchal. I'm less inclined to read it like that, honestly. I'm less inclined to read it like that because we've already been prepped for Ron here. Ron told Malfoy to do something that Harry knew he would never have dared say in front of Mrs. Weasley. So even before we get to that point, even before we get to the direct threat against Hermione, Ron is already fired up. He is ready to go. He recognizes Malfoy's, joyous complicity in all that is happening here at the Quidditch World Cup. So when Harry intervenes, Hermione's a witch, Harry snarled. Have it your own way, Potter, said Malfoy, grinning maliciously. Is this Harry taking agency from Hermione? Maybe. Like, I can't completely dismiss the allegation there, but I think it is clearly well-intentioned, and clearly we also get support from Hermione, right? You watch your mouth, shouted Ron. Everybody present knew that mudblood was a very offensive term for a witch or wizard of Muggle parentage. Thank you, narrative. Thank you for clarifying that for us. I think A, we either knew that at this point, or B, could have got it from context clues, but okay. Never mind, Ron, said Hermione quickly, seizing Ron's arm to restrain him as he took a step toward Malfoy. There is a certain amount of assumed authority in this scene, but I think that it has less to do with Hermione's gender and more to do with the established power dynamic between these three characters specifically. That is to say that Harry is not adopting the voice of the patriarchy when he steps forward to defend Hermione, that he is not asserting in any way that Hermione is his property, or you know, the far more critical and I would argue, obviously, as you can tell from the tone of my voice, I would argue excessive interpretations of that scene. I think this is more to do with not men and women as much as specifically Harry and Ron and Hermione. They understand Hermione and they are acting together in concert as they so often do. As Joseph says in the chat here, Harry is adopting the voice of Harry. Yes, which isn't uncomplicated, okay? Because Harry is still hero number one. He is still extremely exceptional. And because he is male, there is a certain amount of Harry is reflective of power structures. Okay, Harry is, as an archetype, reflective of power structures which Harry, as a character, has no investment in. That is a little more complicated. Hey, good news. We're going to have an opportunity to talk a lot more about that in the future. Yeah. Yeah, as Michaela says, if it's not about Hermione's gender, would it look the same if the genders were all swapped? And yeah, I think so. We've seen the characters interpose themselves in moments of conflict, regardless of gender, right? And regardless of, now this is slightly different because that's just how I condense the words Draco Malfoy, because who has time to say that whole name? Draco is offering a uniquely and specifically and acidically gendered comment here. This is a gendered threat. He would not threaten Ron with being turned upside down and having his knickers on display for everyone. And he certainly wouldn't observe that would, give him a good laugh in quite the same way as Hermione's exposure would there. So all of this is to say, let us not, in our interpretation of these passages, forget that we have elevated the scale of the threat here drastically. This is dramatically different from anything that has come before. Yeah. As Vicady says here, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please correct me in the Crowdcast chat if I'm not. Draco's entitlement is really showing in this scene. Yes. And here, as Bards observes, Hermione will always step in to defend the boys. Yeah, is stepping in to defend the boys now, right? She is taking action, and her action is, come on, Ron, it's not worth it. We should go. This is going to break bad. Like, I can see from my more rational perspective here, Ron, I appreciate your Hufflepuffian loyalty. Thank you, Ron. However, as a Ravenclaw, I can see pretty powerfully here, this is going to break bad and we should go. We should not be here next. Really doesn't matter that I'm, Muggle-born. This is going to get real bad. And it really doesn't matter, Ron, parenthetically, that you are not Muggle-born. Yes. Okay, good. Gosh, so much chat here. If you guys don't have the opportunity to keep up with the chat during these live sessions, A, if you're listening to the podcast version, please come and join us for a live chat if you can make it. They're a ton of fun. B, you can go back and read the chat afterward. You can, filter through and see what's what. And if you guys have ongoing thoughts on this topic or on any topic that we'll discuss in this session or any other session, head on over to the Point North Forum, pointnorthmedia.com/forum. I have taken up a huge amount of, okay, I was about to say that I've taken up a huge amount of time on this subject and we really need to move on, but I'm not moving on before I acknowledge this brilliant comment from Jen in the chat. I'm telling you all, says Jen, one-to-one literature trade. Threats of rape or sexual assaults against women need to be equally matched with threats of castration. If this eliminates rape as a plot device, all the better. Gosh, agreed. I have... the degree of fatigue that I have, the degree of exasperation, the degree of frustration, the degree of outright fury that I have surrounding rape as a plot device, in particular sexual assault as a plot device, sexual assault as a means of providing just add water backstory to female characters, women being fridged relentlessly in order to motivate male characters. Let's do better. Let's do better in 2018. One of the reasons, by the way, that I really want to talk about the works of Ursula K. Le Guin is because of that progressive political agenda, is because she is so smart and so nuanced in that space. And Tombs of Atuan is a great example of that. So that's one of the reasons that I think we'll be talking about Tombs of Atuan in the very near future. And Angela Lurie crediting here. We're looking at you, Outlander. Boy, howdy, aren't we? Okay, let's keep moving on because, geez, we've got so much to get through. We've done 2 slides so far, you guys, and we're 45 minutes in. Okay, here we go. Now we're talking about house elves, kind of talking again about this othering of significant populations, this drawing of lines, right? Another way in which we are going to delineate the wizarding world here is the line that is drawn, of course, between wizards and muggles. The proposed line that is drawn between purebloods and muggle-born witches and wizards too. That's as consequential, but much less stark, I think, in the movement of this story in particular. But we're also drawing a hard line between, well, it's not just between wizards and house elves, right? It's also between wizards and the other sapient species that live in the wizarding world. The line between wizards, human wizards and goblins, let's say, or human wizards and centaurs, or human wizards and giants, or human wizards and Vila. We've already talked about how the Vila are problematic right from their introduction. Human wizards and leprechauns, and now human wizards and house elves too. House elves get a very raw deal, said Hermione indignantly. It's slavery, that's what it is. That Mr. Crouch made her go up to the top of the stadium and she was terrified and he's got her bewitched so that she can't even run when they start trampling tents. Why doesn't anyone do something about it? Well, the elves are happy, aren't they? Ron said. You heard old Winky back at the match. House elves is not supposed to have fun. That's what she likes, being bossed around. It's people like you, Ron, Hermione began hotly, who prop up rotten and unjust systems just because they're too lazy to... Another loud bang echoed from the edge of the wood. Let's just keep moving, shall we? Said Ron, and Harry saw him glance edgily at Hermione. Perhaps there was truth in what Malfoy had said. Perhaps Hermione was in more danger than they were. They set off again, Harry still searching his pockets, even though he knew his wand wasn't there. We'll come back to the matter of Harry's wand in just a few pages. Obviously, as we've discussed before in the last few sessions here, looking at Goblet of Fire, the Spew storyline is not this book's greatest triumph, but that does not mean that it isn't founded in a solid and defensible principle. I mean, like, of course, demonstrably, it is founded in a solid and well-principled inclination from Hermione here. In fact, it is so solid and well-intentioned that we've done it before. The freeing of Dobby is very literally the argument about house elves. We're returning to it now, but we're returning to it again, right? Here's your transition. Here's your fourth book transition, kind of demarcated by the third book, I suppose. We're turning away from personal stories into stories of communities and societies, right? This is Ron's response. Well, house elves are happy, aren't they? You heard old Winky back at the match. House elves is not supposed to have fun. That's what she likes, being bossed around. Now, partly, I am absolutely willing to read this as Ron calming Hermione, right? Now is not the time. Doesn't matter. This is what I'm going to go to. This is going to be my explanation. Just, you cannot be mad about this. There are other things that we have to deal with right now, Hermione. That I do think is, as we see, let's just keep moving, shall we? And Harry saw him glance edgily at Hermione. Like, I don't necessarily think that this is Ron's considered perspective on house elves. This is Ron trying to defuse the situation. But to the degree that Ron is trying to defuse the situation, I think he's also speaking in support or in recognition of what may be the bad side of Hufflepuff orthodoxy. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I know not here in the Crowdcast chat, I don't think anyone is listening for the first time to Dear Mr. Potter in the context of the live chat, but I know that there will be people out there listening to the podcast for whom this will be their first episode. And I just want to reiterate here, it is my assertion that Harry, Ron, and Hermione are not actually, as all Gryffindors are not actually Gryffindors, but they are representative of other houses who have been touched by the fairy wand of heroism. You, sir, madam, are a named protagonist and are thus Gryffindor. Harry is Slytherin. He's a leader. He is ambitious. He is all of those things. We'll delve more into that in the rest of the book. Ron is Hufflepuff. He is about community and fellowship and loyalty. He's going to be about that for the rest of the book too. Hermione is Ravenclaw. She is about logic and rationality and justice in a sense. She's going to be about that for the rest of the book too. We're really splintering these characters into their other house identities in the course of this novel in particular. And it does seem to me that in Ron's argument here, there is the seed of what would be dark Hufflepuff, right? Hufflepuffian orthodoxy taken to an unhealthy extreme. Hufflepuffs value community. They value society, and communities and societies are ordered by explicit and implicit rules and relationships. Societies work because we have a hierarchy, even if that hierarchy is completely flat, even if we have a single tier social hierarchy in which everyone is exactly equal to everyone else, the existence of that flat hierarchy is a hierarchy in and of itself. Now, Hufflepuffian orthodoxy could theoretically cement itself into a preservation of the social status quo at the expense of justice. Ron's response here, well, she likes it, and this is what people want. It's fine. This is what house elves want. They're a part, they have their place in our society, and seems fine. And of course, Winky in this instance, is expressing things which may not be ultimately true, but are true from her perspective right now, that may not speak to grander and more inscrutable kinds of large-scale justice, the kind of philosophical justice that a Ravenclaw would be interested in, for example. Winky isn't expressing that. Winky is expressing a commonplace solidarity right now. And this, I think, may be where Hufflepuff wizards go bad. Arguably, the contrast to that would be Ravenclaw wizards going bad by ignoring the personal account and the personal desire and kind of coming to conflicts like this from a philosophical perspective. This is philosophically flawed. This is problematic for these logical reasons. Therefore, it must be destroyed, regardless of what people actually want. And denying agency in that sense could well be or one of the Ravenclaw paths. Let's be honest, there are way more Ravenclaw paths to the dark side of the Force than there are Hufflepuff paths to the dark side of the Force. I'm pretty confident in that. But yes. Okay, let me see. Becca Eller is asking, wait, is this more of the shrinking of the elves thing? From powerful and mighty to Tinkerbell with house elves somewhere in the middle? No, I don't. Okay. I don't think so. Becca is referring to the diminution of elves in the fairy tale and fantasy tradition of Western Europe, right? That if you go back to the medieval period, elves are fantastic and terrible and incredibly powerful and are elves in the Tolkienian sense, right? Fairies are elves in the Tolkienian sense. And then by the time that we get to the Victorian era, fairies are Tinkerbell. They are tiny and diminished and paint the dewdrops onto the flower petals and so on and so forth. They have been literally diminished through the passage of years here. What's most interesting in terms of the depiction of house elves, I would argue, is that house elves aren't even really playing into the fairy tradition at all. House elves are playing more into a goblin tradition, right? That's the kind of folkloric root of Dobby, certainly in the second book, and now Winky and house elves in general seem to be more like, I was going to say tame goblins, but even then it's not tame, is it? It's not civilized goblins. That's unpleasant. They are oppressed and dominated goblins. And obviously the relationship between goblins in the wizarding world and elves in the wizarding world is significant, is substantial. Yes. Okay, let me see here. Are we good? Are we clear? Have I caught up with everything? I'm honestly just not sure if we've caught up with anything, or if in fact there is a way of catching up with everything. I'll just do the best that I can. Let's keep moving forward to Mors Mordre. Mordre. I'm just going to keep working on that. It doesn't feel quite right in my mouth, so I'm just going to keep saying it over and over, and we'll see where we get. There was silence. Harry got to his feet and peered around the tree. It was too dark to see very far, but he could sense somebody standing just beyond the range of his vision. "Who's there?" he said. And then, without warning, the silence was rent by a voice unlike any they had heard in the wood, and it uttered not a panicked shout, but what sounded like a spell. "Mors Mordre!" And something vast, green and glittering erupted from the patch of darkness Harry's eyes had been struggling to penetrate. It flew up over the treetops and into the sky. "What the?" gasped Ron as he sprang to his feet again, staring up at the thing that had appeared. For a split second, Harry thought it was another leprechaun formation. Then he realized it was a colossal skull, comprised of what looked like emerald stars, with a serpent protruding from its mouth like a tongue. As they watched, it rose higher and higher, blazing in a haze of greenish smoke, etched against the black sky like a new constellation. Suddenly, the wood all around them erupted with screams. Harry didn't understand why, but the only possible cause was the sudden appearance of the skull, which had now risen high enough to illuminate the entire wood like some grisly neon sign. He scanned the darkness for the person who had conjured the skull, but he couldn't see anyone. It don't connect. Asking, can you imagine the PTSD of the adults there? This had to be absolutely awful. Yes, this is extraordinarily powerful, even by the standards of the chapter so far, even by the standards of Death Eaters walking freely through the wizarding camp, torturing muggles, threatening Hermione directly or indirectly, just causing death and destruction in all directions. This is what unifies the entire camp. The entire camp starts screaming. This is an outright act of terrorism in the truest sense. This is supposed to engender terror for actually surprisingly sophisticated reasons, which will become apparent right at the end of the book. And I'm going to jump ahead to the why of the Dark Mark here, but the very existence of the Dark Mark is, just must be utterly traumatic for all of the adults here who are present, and presumably all of the children who, it would seem, have been raised on stories of the Wizarding War, right? Like everyone apart from Harry knows about Voldemort. Everyone apart from Harry knows what happened back then. And Harry has displayed a singular lack of curiosity on this subject. You would think that there would be books written about the First Wizarding War, that there would be books written, there would be lecture tours given by, I survived the First Wizarding War. Let me tell you my oral history of what happened back then in those benighted days. You would think that Harry would have looked a little more closely into it. Harry, of course, hasn't, because he still needs to be our reader surrogate in this regard. He still needs to be ignorant of these events so that the other characters can explain to Harry, by which I mean the reader, what happened then. But this is an outright act of terrorism, an outright assault on wizarding culture itself. It's, again, how the world has changed. Here in 2018, we're much more familiar, I would argue, than even J.K. Rowling was when she wrote this book about the powerful evocation of threatening and terrorist iconography, right? We have seen the attempted reclamation of the swastika. We have seen the attempted reclamation of all kinds of Nazi imagery and iconography and paraphernalia over the course of the last couple of years. And it's impossible not to think of that when you come into this scene. I think it's impossible not to think about what is being asserted here and the way that it is being asserted. Now, ultimately, as I say, that is going to be slightly turned. That is going to be slightly twisted. The actual cause of this emergence of the Dark Mark is not quite what we expect it to be at this point, but it is no less impactful for all of that, because icons, images, metaphors, these things have a power and a weight that is all their own. And you don't get to invoke that stuff casually. You don't get to claim ignorance. You don't get to distill. You don't get to clarify or to quantify the connotative qualities associated with an image or an icon or a this is so much more powerful than that, of a dark mark. You don't get to selectively employ these icons. You don't get to, as a person who lives in the world, as a person who is part of a society, as a person who is hopefully at some fundamental level respectful of the interior, complexity of others, you don't get to do that. That is not how icons and images and metaphors work. Let me see here as I catch up. Yeah. So Harry is also 14. Raven Darkholm says, Harry is also 14. The impulse to learn your history tends to come later. That is very true, actually. That is something that's absolutely consistent with, I think, all adults that I have known in my life. Like, I didn't know anyone when I was in high school or even in college who really loved history. Everyone who loved history came to it later in life. I think you just require a certain perspective. You require a certain something. And Jin is also clarifying here, would you really want to read them? He can imagine his parents as happy rather than knowing how completely horrible it was. He was also trained for his whole life not to ask questions about it. That is very true. And you can imagine the constant pressure, the low-key but constant pressure that's coming from Hagrid and Dumbledore and McGonagall and, the other well-intentioned staff and faculty of Hogwarts to kind of push back against that. Yeah. Let me see here. Karen says in the chat, the recent resurgence of neo-Nazis in the US has disclosed a similar gap among well-meaning people who you would have assumed shared the same cultural historical orientations. Some for whom the meaning of the swastika is vivid and personal, and some for whom it's so distant they haven't felt the need to be curious about it. Yes. Becca's pointing out in contradiction there, some of us have always loved history. Some of us, Becca, have a formidable talent for history, as you do. Some of us, I think those of us with an amateur interest in history come to it later in life than perhaps you did. But yes, yeah, no, I take the correction. You're absolutely right. And Karen, I think you're absolutely right too. I think that, it's surprising how prescient the evocation of this, imagined fictional symbol is. It's surprising how powerful this symbol is in the context of the book and how powerfully evocative of real responses to provocative symbols are too, right? I really can't, I think, delve deeply enough into this. So rather than trying to half-ass it, I think we'll draw a veil over this, because goodness knows we'll have the opportunity to come back. Oh, before we move on though, I do want to call out Mors Mordra. The incantation of this spell is fascinating. It's another one of these kind of incomplete pieces of association. We get mort, of course, from Voldemort, mort in the French, meaning death, and mordre meaning to bite. So in French, it would give us, to bite death, or, something associated with Death Eaters. That seems to be fairly evocative. So that sits quite nicely. We also get, I pulled here, the literal translation of the Norwegian word Mors Mordra would be mother's killers. Like Mors Mordra in Norwegian would just mean mother's killers, which is, almost certainly not intentional, right? J.K. Rowling was not the philologist or the linguist that Professor Tolkien was. I think Professor Tolkien would have been thoroughly pleased, would have been giddy with delight at the bilingual pun that is going on here. I don't imagine that J.K. Rowling looked into the Norwegian roots of this spell. That just doesn't seem to be something that would interest her so well. But wow, that is apposite, isn't it? So it means Death Eaters and also mother's killers. Hey, Harry, how are you holding up? You doing all right, Harry? Okay. Let's continue onward. I thought that I would be able to get through more here, but yes, it's yes, as Here's and Bart says, I think it's much more likely she was just drawing from the French. Yes, I think so too. Yeah, good. All right. Let's get into our return of Mr. Crouch. Out of the way, Arthur, said a cold, curt voice. It was Mr. Crouch. He and the other ministry wizards were closing in on them. Harry got to his feet to face them. Mr. Crouch's face was taut with rage. Which of you did that? He snapped, his dark eyes darting between them. Which of you conjured the dark mark? We didn't do that, said Harry, gesturing up at the skull. We didn't do anything, said Ron, who was rubbing his elbow and looking indignantly at his father. What do you attack us for? Do not lie, sir, shouted Mr. Crouch. His wand was still pointing directly at Ron, and his eyes were popping. He looked slightly mad. You've been discovered at the scene of the crime. Barty, whispered a witch in a long woolen dressing gown. They're kids, Barty. They'd never have been able to. Where did the mark come from, you three? Said Mr. Weasley quickly. Over there, said Hermione shakily, pointing at the place where they had heard the voice. There was someone behind the trees. They shouted words, an incantation. Oh, stood over there, did they? Said Mr. Crouch, turning his popping eyes on Hermione, now disbelief etched all over his face. Said an incantation, did they? You seem very well informed about how the mark is summoned, missy. But none of the ministry wizards, apart from Mr. Crouch, seemed to think it was remotely likely that Harry, Ron, or Hermione had conjured the skull. On the contrary, at Hermione's words, they had all raised their wands again and were pointing in the direction she had indicated, squinting through the dark trees. Yes, Alice, anticipating my most visceral and emotional response to this. Missy, Mr. Crouch? That is not, excuse me, how we address Hermione Granger, or indeed how we address anyone. Let's just make that a rule. Let's just not use that anymore. Thoroughly unpleasant. Yes. Yes. Will is saying between the cold voice, taut face, and hatred of lying, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between Barty and Voldy. Yeah, certain connections, certain similarities there, which are almost structural, right? Because not just Barty Crouch and Voldemort in this particular instance, but also Draco and Lucius and Severus Snape for a start. You know, this is consistent. This is one of the ways in which dark wizards are readily identifiable from a page one reading. And of course, it's also possible for that to be utterly subverted as we move forward too. But yeah, this is not something that we like here. Yes. Crouch is panicking and throwing blame in any direction he can, says Jen. Yes, wants there to be an explanation more than he wants there to be justice. He wants to identify the culprit and then close this whole thing down. Because once there is an answer, the question has much less power over you. This is exactly what we saw back in Prisoner of Azkaban, right? What is the explanation for Sirius Black's incarceration? Well, he did it. We needed to solve the mystery. We needed to provide an answer. Justice has to not only be done, but be seen to be done. And now, I mean, maybe we don't feel for Barty Crouch because of the awful way that he conducts himself in this particular moment. But I think if we take a step back, we can probably feel for bureaucrats and officials who are left with this titanic mess to clear up, this awful, horrifying mess to clear up. Yeah, it's pretty bad. But we see immediately, as I say, outright accusations. Let's wrap up in fact, I've got 2 more slides from this chapter. We're never going to get through our entire reading this week, you guys. It's going to be fine. You don't mind spending a few more weeks with me on the Goblet of Fire, do you? Bill was sitting at the small kitchen table holding a bedsheet to his arm, which was bleeding profusely. Charlie had a large rip in his shirt, and Percy was sporting a bloody nose. Fred, George, and Ginny looked unhurt, though shaken. Did you get them, Dad? Said Bill sharply. The person who conjured the mark? No, said Mr. Weasley. We found Barty Crouch's elf holding Harry's wand, but we're none the wiser about who actually conjured the mark. What? Said Bill, Charlie, and Percy together. Harry's wand, said Fred. Mr. Crouch's elf, said Percy, sounding thunderstruck. With some assistance from Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Mr. Weasley explained what had happened in the woods. When they had finished their story, Percy swelled indignantly. Well, Mr. Crouch is quite right to get rid of an elf like that, he said. Running away when he'd expressly told her not to, embarrassing him in front of the whole ministry. How would he have looked if she'd been brought up in front of the Department of the Regulation and Control? She didn't do anything. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hermione snapped at Percy, who looked very taken aback. Hermione had always gone on fairly well with Percy, better indeed than any of the others. Hermione, a wizard in Mr. Crouch's position can't afford a house elf who's going to run amok with a wand, said Percy, pompously recovering himself. She didn't run amok, shouted Hermione. She just picked it up off the ground. Well, Percy LaDouche, says Perspicuous Enigma. In action, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, again, not Percy's favorite moment here. I do like the beat here where, this is, let me catch up with a question here. Joseph says it's a bit unclear what exactly the 3 of them were doing. Were they dueling? This is the injuries that they're suffering here. Bill was sitting at a small kitchen table holding a bedsheet to his arm, which was bleeding profusely. Charlie had a large rip in his shirt, and Percy was sporting a bloody nose. Not entirely clear what they were doing. I have no trouble believing that they were getting into the rough and tumble of it all. I'm sure that there were a few impromptu duels, and I'm sure that there was a certain amount of non-magical fisticuffs happening in the encampment here, in the campsite here. Percy here, I do love the beat of recognition that Hermione and Percy have always got along better than anyone else has with Percy, right? That Hermione has always been more sympathetic to Percy than anyone else has, because of course she is. Because Hermione and Percy, not actually a million miles apart, not actually completely different people, right? Hermione still has some of that same respect for the rules, and not just, the obeying of the rules. Obviously, she will rebel whenever she wants to, but she has had previously a respect for social order. in exactly the way that Percy has. Unlike Percy, Hermione is now rebelling. Hermione is now pushing back against that. Her ferocity has not been quashed, has not been quelled within her by her respect for social order and social orthodoxy, right? That has always been Hermione's argument. Let's not obey the rules because the rules themselves are important. Let's obey the rules because we obey the rules. Like, that's what it's about. It's not about the punishment that will befall us if we don't. It's about doing the right thing, capital R, capital T. That's very important to Hermione. So the connection there with Percy makes a lot of sense to me. But yes, this is not Percy's greatest moment amid everything. Though, well, okay, maybe that's not completely true. Maybe Percy is doing exactly what we just credited Ron with earlier. Maybe Percy is trying to hold together his understanding of the world, right? Maybe he's trying to hold together in the face of terrible affliction, of outright assault, of actual terrorism. He's trying to hold together his notion of what the wizarding world is. Maybe Percy here is speaking out of fear, out of a desire for things to remain unchanged and unchallenged. But he's still doing so poorly, right? He's still expressing himself poorly and taking a morally very dubious line there. Yes. Harrison Bart says, Hermione is all about logic and rules until she isn't. Yeah. Well, because Hermione is still Gryffindor, right? She is still touched by the fairy wand of heroism. She is still a named protagonist. So she's going to be bound by her character, both in the textual and extra-textual sense, both in the kind of literary and personality senses of that word, I suppose. She's going to be bound by her character until it becomes time to be a hero, and then she's going to be a hero because that's more important. And exactly the same way as Ron is going to be bound by loyalty and honesty and the Hufflepuffian virtues until he needs to be a hero, and he's going to be able to at least set that aside. Never stand directly against it. I don't think we would tolerate that kind of character break as readers of the Harry Potter series, but still, push back against it. Yes, good. One of the things, I haven't seen this pulled out here, but one of the things that always strikes me reading this passage is Ginny, right? Bill sitting at the small kitchen table holding a bedsheet to his arm, which was bleeding profusely. Charlie had a large rip in his shirt. Percy was sporting a bloody nose. Fred, George, and Ginny looked unhurt, though shaken. This must have been terrifying for Ginny. This must have been just awful for Ginny, given her own very personal PTSD and the way that very personal PTSD connects back to Voldemort, right? And also given her relative youth and inexperience. Even Harry and Ron and Hermione have seen more of the world, have seen more of this kind of thing than Ginny has. This must have been just awful. I, of course, Team Ginny all the way. Yeah. Okay, let's wrap up this chapter with our discussion of the Dark Mark. I don't get it, said Ron, frowning. I mean, it's still only a shape in the sky. Ron, you know who and his followers sent the Dark Mark into the air whenever they killed, said Mr. Weasley. The terror it inspired, you've no idea. You're too young. Just picture coming home and finding the Dark Mark hovering over your house and knowing what you're to find inside. Mr. Weasley winced. Everyone's worst fear, the very worst. There was silence for a moment. Then Bill, removing the sheet from his arm to check on his cut, said, well, it didn't help us tonight, whoever conjured it. It scared the Death Eaters. It scared the Death Eaters away the moment they saw it. They all disapparated before we got near enough to unmask any of them. We caught the Robertses before they hit the ground, though. They're having their memories modified right now. Death Eaters, said Harry. What are Death Eaters? It's what you-know-who supporters call themselves, said Bill. I think we saw what's left of them tonight, the ones who managed to keep themselves out of Azkaban, anyway. We can't prove it was them, Bill, said Mr. Weasley. No, it probably was, he added hopelessly. Yeah, I bet it was, said Ron suddenly. Dad, we met Draco Malfoy in the woods, and he as good as told us that his dad was one of those nutters in masks. And we all know the Malfoys were right in with you-know-who. But they were Voldemort's supporters, Harry began. Everyone flinched. Like most of the wizarding world, the Weasleys always avoided saying Voldemort's name. Sorry, said Harry quickly. What were you-know-who's supporters up to, levitating muggles? I mean, what was the point? The point, said Mr. Weasley with a hollow laugh. Harry, that's their idea of fun. Half the muggle killings back when you-know-who was in power were done for fun. I suppose they had a few drinks tonight and couldn't resist reminding us that that lots of them are still at large. A nice little reunion for them, he finished disgustedly. Arthur Weasley, who lived through all of this, proving once again that he is the very best man, the only man worthy of Molly Weasley, I dare say. This is exposition. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier with Harry being the reader surrogate in these scenes. Harry can't have read Death Eaters, A Complete History at Hogwarts in the library, or even over the holidays. He can't have been assigned. It is interesting, though, that actually there's no mention of this in his schoolwork, that at no point in his defense against the dark arts class has anyone mentioned the Dark Mark or Death Eaters or anything like that. I mean, Fine. For reasons which have been previously discussed. Harry needs to be ignorant so that we can get the exposition when we're ready for it, and now we are ready for it. So now we've got Death Eaters and the Dark Mark, and the absolute disgust, anger, hopelessness, dispiritedness, disquiet of Arthur Weasley here, coupled with that recognition that the world is insecure. You know, he's now wrestling. I think when we get this line from him, just picture coming home and finding the dark mark hovering over your house and knowing what you're about to find inside. Mr. Weasley winced. Everyone's worst fear, the very worst. He's thinking about the Burrow. He's thinking about his family. He's doing what you are supposed to do when you see the dark mark. The dark mark is a tool of fear. It is an act of terrorism in that it engenders a non-specific fear of further assault and further retribution. When the dark mark is in the sky over a house, you are thinking, a part of you, oh my God, what has happened in that house? What awful event has befallen the poor owner of that house? But then you are thinking, they could do that to anyone. They could do that to me. They could do that to my family. And so you quash and quell any spirit of opposition, any spirit of rebellion. You silence those who would stand publicly against you. That is one of the tools of tyranny. The fear of retribution is the greatest weapon in the tyrant's arsenal. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yes, we're asking a little bit about what happened to the Roberts in the aftermath of this. Nothing good, I can imagine. Nothing good. We've already established, by the way, that the Obliviate spell is imperfect, right? It seems to be the case that Mr. Roberts is already pushing back against the Obliviate spell. Otherwise, why else would it have to be administered 10 times a day? As we said, why would it need to be constantly updated and managed here? It could just be applied right at the end of the whole session, along with, you know, a significant payment in cash for Mr. Roberts' trouble. I really hope that they do it well. I really hope they get a very skilled manipulator of memory to cast that particular Obliviate spell on Mr. Roberts and his family, because otherwise the alternative is far, far worse. I'm just going to assume that no one is at any point going to get nightmares about what happened to them. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Gildar's Winter saying, imagine a fortnight later he recalls everything. It would be very bad is the thing. It would be extremely bad. Okay. I only have another 20 minutes. We are definitely not going to get all the way through our reading this week, but we can now launch our way into Chapter 10, Mayhem at the Ministry, which is at least a very short chapter. I've only pulled 3 slides from this chapter, so this will probably do us, and then we'll pick up with Chapter 11 aboard the Hogwarts Express next week, which is probably smart. Actually, that means that we won't be able to discuss the unforgivable curses next week. That'll get pushed into the following week, but that's probably not too bad. We've got quite a lot to deal with next week with the Triwizard Tournament and Mad-Eye Moody. Speaking of whom, Mrs. Weasley, who had evidently been waiting for them in the front yard, came running toward them, still wearing her bedroom slippers, her face pale and strained, a rolled-up copy of the Daily Prophet clutched in her hand. Arthur, I've been so worried, so worried. She flung her arms around Mr. Weasley's neck, and the Daily Prophet fell out of her limp hand onto the ground. Looking down, Harry saw the headline, Scenes of Terror at the Quidditch World Cup, complete with twinkling black and white photograph of the dark mark over the treetops. You're all right, Mrs. Weasley muttered distractedly, releasing Mr. Weasley and staring around at them all with red eyes. You're alive. Oh, boys. And to everybody's surprise, she seized Fred and George and pulled them both into such a tight hug that their heads banged together. Ouch! Mom, you're strangling us! I shouted at you before you left, Mrs. Weasley said, starting to sob. That's all I've been thinking about. What if you know who had got you and the last thing I ever said to you was that you didn't get enough owls? Oh, Fred and George. Come on now, Molly. We're all perfectly okay, said Mr. Weasley soothingly, prizing her off the twins and leading her back toward the house. Bill, he added in an undertone, pick up that paper. I want to see what it says. When they were all crammed into the tiny kitchen and Hermione had made Mrs. Weasley a cup of very strong tea, into which Mr. Weasley insisted on pouring a shot of Ogden's Old Fire whiskey, Bill handed his father the newspaper. Mr. Weasley scanned the front page while Percy looked over his shoulder. I knew it, said Mr. Weasley heavily. Ministry blunders, culprits not apprehended, lax security, dark wizards running unchecked, national disgrace. Who wrote this? Oh, of course. Rita Skeeter. We'll come back to Rita Skeeter in the chapters to come. Of course, there's no real narrative substance in this beat. There's no real narrative reason to pull this passage for our examination except to look at the brilliant characterization of Molly Weasley and to think about the cause and the consequence of the dark mark. It isn't just those wizards who were present, all 100,000 of them who were present, who witnessed the dark mark. Those are not the only people who are going to be touched by its influence. in fact, in some sense, it's going to be much worse for people who were separated from friends and family at the Wizarding World Cup, the Quidditch World Cup, separated from people who were in direct attendance when the sigil of He Who Shall Not Be named emerged in the night sky. This is what terrorism does. It strikes at your ability to stand up. It hampers your ability to speak your truth. It threatens and causes despair, causes hopelessness, causes fear. Now, Molly Weasley has done what good people do when faced with fear. She has turned to affirmation. She has reconnected with the people around her. She has been reminded of what is actually important. But there are going to be plenty of others, even if they're not directly influenced by this article in The Prophet, this article by Rita Skeeter, who, as I say, she'll emerge in the narrative again later. There are going to be others who are going to withdraw from the people around them, who are going to be suspicious of community, be suspicious of those things which best enable us to fight back, to stand together, banded together in the name of justice and righteousness and good. This is what terrorism does. And what we get here in The Return to the Burrow is a very astute piece of commentary, very astute piece of characterization from J.K. Rowling. Let's transition back to our power trio as Harry gets to a point that he probably should have gotten to a few days earlier. There's something I haven't told you, Harry said. On Saturday morning, I woke up with my scar hurting again. Ron's and Hermione's reactions were almost exactly as Harry had imagined them back in his bedroom on Privet Drive. Hermione gasped and started making suggestions at once, mentioning a number of reference books and everybody from Albus Dumbledore to Madame Pomfrey, the Hogwarts nurse. Ron simply looked dumbstruck. But he wasn't there, was he? You know who? I mean, last time your scar kept hurting, he was at Hogwarts, wasn't he? I'm sure he wasn't on Privet Drive, said Harry. But I was dreaming about him and Peter, Wormtail. I can't remember all of it now, but they were plotting to kill someone. He had teetered for a moment on the verge of saying me, but couldn't bring himself to make Hermione look any more horrified than she already did. It was only a dream, said Ron bracingly, just a nightmare. Yeah, but was it, though? Said Harry, turning to look out of the window at the brightening sky. It's weird, isn't it? My scar hurts, and 3 days later the Death Eaters are on the march, and Voldemort signs up in the sky again. Don't say his name, Ron hissed through gritted teeth. At this point, we kind of have to wonder why it is that Harry keeps saying Voldemort's name in front of Ron. Like, I understand that speaking the name denies him the power of, well, if not anonymity, then at least pseudonymity, right? As Dumbledore has already acknowledged, when we refuse to speak his name, we cede power to him. He becomes greater in myth and in archetype than he is even in actuality, which is not to say that he isn't pretty significant in actuality too. But come on, Harry. Come on, just for your buddy Ron, maybe stop saying his name, huh? Maybe just be a little bit more considerate here. The response to Harry's scar hurting again, I love that it is recognized textually that this is exactly what he anticipated. Of course it is, because he knows Hermione and he knows Ron, and these are exactly the responses that he anticipated. Hermione starts offering solutions, right? Oh, you need to read this book and this book and this book. Go talk to Albus Dumbledore. Go talk to Madame Pomfrey. Go talk to Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Go do what you have to do. Like, let's work the problem here. And Ron is just stunned. And Ron, again, this kind of ties back to that earlier comment about house elves to Hermione, right? Ron is offering a kind of reassurance, a kind of consolation that borders on outright denial. Well, maybe there isn't a problem. Maybe everything's okay. You should just calm down and be okay. Like, this is not for me, you understand. Ron is not offering reassurance for himself. He's trying to comfort his friend. So when he's trying to comfort Hermione, when she is outraged and indignant about the treatment of house elves, he does so by saying, well, maybe it's not so bad. And maybe you should just, maybe there isn't really a problem. And this is what Winky wants and everything's fine. And maybe just calm down. I just want you to be happy. Please just let me let you be happy. That would be great. And here he's doing something similar to Harry, he wasn't there, was he? You know who? I mean, last time your scar kept hurting, he was at Hogwarts, wasn't he? He wasn't there. And Harry says, well, no, I don't think he's there, but it's a hell of a coincidence. And I had a dream. And Ron says, but it was only a dream. It was just a nightmare. Ron here giving a kind of denial, offering a kind of denial, rejecting, in a sense, the premise of Harry's concern here. Not in a non-supportive way, if anything, in an overly supportive way, which is why Ron always kind of comes around in the end and starts working on the problem too. Let me see. Joseph says, I feel like the reason for the name not being said is an underdeveloped conceit. No really good textual reason for it is given, and it just makes Ron seem ridiculous in situations like this. Yeah, I think it is mythic, right? You can understand why J.K. Rowling as author wants Voldemort's name to be somewhat obscured, right? It does grant him power. That's what she, as author, wants. It is also what some members of the wizarding world want, both good and bad, I think. Obviously, the Death Eaters and the supporters of Voldemort want his name to be unspoken because it gives him power. But there are other people, like Cornelius Fudge, for example, who wants Voldemort rendered in more mythic terms. Because if he is rendered in more mythic terms, then he isn't just something that happened. It wasn't corruption within the wizarding world. There aren't systemic problems throughout the wizarding world that enabled Voldemort to come to power. He's not Voldemort. He's not a guy. He's you-know-who. He's this mythic figure. He's more like a natural disaster, more like a prophesied judgment than he is a failure of wizarding society. Voldemort should never have come to power. Tom Riddle should never have been at Hogwarts. I mean, let's track this all the way back to its origins, which of course we are encouraged to do through the framing story that we get right at the beginning of this book and the accounting of the old Riddle house, right? That's not just about introducing where we are in Voldemort's story in the here and now, but where we were. There were systemic failures in the wizarding world that led to the first wizarding war, that led to the tyranny of Voldemort in the first place. So it actually serves a lot of people that Voldemort be rendered in more mythic, more archetypal terms. We don't talk about his name because if we talk about his name, then he's just a man, and that either disempowers him in a way that threatens his supporters and people who perhaps are still supporting him even today, or disempowers him and makes him mundane probably the wrong word, but makes him conventional and containable and understandable in a way that he isn't if he's this mythic figure, right? We, like, in some sense, human beings, in real world psychology, we like to make our villains into monsters because monsters are inexplicable. Monsters are forces of nature. Monsters descend upon us and change the world. We can't be expected to fight them. We can't be expected to oppose them. Certainly there is nothing that anyone could have done when you-know-who took power. But there is something that we could have done when Tom Riddle took power. When Tom Riddle turned himself into what he turned himself into, became all that he became. We could have stopped Tom Riddle. We couldn't have stopped this mythic figure, right? So while there isn't a and then of course we're dealing with a decade of superstition. We're dealing with a lot of adults repeating to children, we don't say his name, we don't do that. But yes, it is, I think you're right, Joseph, in that it is underdeveloped. And also, of course, I should observe, because this is kind of something with which I have an ongoing fascination, there is a sense in which the speaking of a name does give the subject of that name power, or at least is transactive in a sense, right? If you learn in traditional fairy stories and like the underpinnings of modern fantasy in Western Europe, if you learn something's true name, true of our discussion of A Wizard of Earthsea, of course, then you can command it. But there's also something to the speaking of a name giving power to the named figure, right? We don't say his name, so he is not aware of us. We don't draw his attention. We don't draw his ire. To speak a name is in part to summon that presence here. So there's a lot going on, and obviously names are very important in terms of the folklore and fairy tale underpinnings of Harry Potter. But yeah, I do think we can make an in-universe argument for why people don't want to say his name, either for, well, I was going to say for good reasons or for bad, but no, for two different kinds of bad reasons, right? Because of support or because of discomfort about what happened, right? And obviously I'm talking about Cornelius Fudge, and I'm talking about the Ministry, and I'm talking about the people who could actually have prevented Tom Riddle from coming to power in the first place. But then we get people like the Weasleys, and we've talked about the emergence of the Dark Mark. Are we just going to accept that a wizard can go bad and do this? Are we just going to accept that this could happen to any of us at any point, that the world is a fundamentally unsafe place? Well, of course we don't want to do that. But the world is a fundamentally unsafe place when you're a wizard. The world really can be changed in a moment. And to a lesser degree, to a less dramatic and metaphorical degree, the same is true of the real world. We must always be careful when we try to render our villains, render our opponents, render our enemies as monsters. That act of dehumanizing really does empower them. I would argue that Voldemort is, throughout the span of Harry Potter, far more powerful when he goes unnamed than he is when he is named. This isn't about magic. This is about storytelling. Yeah. Good. Okay. Let me see. Are we talking about? I want to track back what Alice is saying here in the chat, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to because, yes, we're just talking about the power of names. The power of names as we move forward. Yes. Good. Okay, let's. I've got just a few minutes left. Let's wrap up with another segue back to comedy, right? Because for all that we have irrevocably changed the texture and tone of Harry Potter's world here, for all that we have unleashed a new darkness or an old darkness upon the world, a new darkness upon the life of Harry Potter, at least for all that we have changed the rules of the game here, it's still a Harry Potter story. And we haven't yet transitioned to the point where Harry and Ron and Hermione are adults able to engage with the world on an adult footing, on an adult basis. They are still children. Though, unfortunately, we're not going to get to aboard the Hogwarts Express, get to chapter 11 in this week's reading, but there are a couple of slides there that I can't wait to pull because they are so resolutely non-magical. The idea, right at the beginning, just a quick tease for next week, right? The idea that an end of holidays gloom has descended upon Harry right before he goes back to wizard school is nuts. Like, I understand it. It's narratively completely justified, but the idea that the summer holidays can be more special to Harry than going to wizard school speaks absolutely to the human ability to normalize the exceptional, to find within familiarity a certain kind of contempt, at least a jaded kind of contempt, right? Let's talk about this last slide here from chapter 10, and then we'll call it quits for today. He heaved a pile of parcels onto Harry's camp bed and dropped the money bag and load of socks next to it. Harry started unwrapping the shopping. Apart from the standard book of spells, grade 4 by Miranda Goshawk, he had a handful of new quills, a dozen rolls of parchment, and refills for his potion-making kit. He'd been running low on spine of lionfish and essence of belladonna. He was just piling underwear into his cauldron when Ron made a loud noise of disgust behind him. What is this? What is that supposed to be? He was holding up something that looked to Harry like a long maroon velvet dress. It had a moldy-looking lace frill at the collar and matching lace cuffs. There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Weasley entered, carrying an armful of freshly laundered Hogwarts robes. "Here you are," she said, sorting them into 2 piles. "Now mind you pack them properly so you don't crease." "Mum, you've given me Ginny's new dress," said Ron, handing it out to her. "Of course I haven't," said Mrs. Weasley. "That's for you. Dress robes." "What?" said Ron, looking horror-struck. "Dress robes," repeated Mrs. Weasley. "It says on your school list you're supposed to have dress robes this year, robes for formal occasions." I wanted to pull this passage for 2 reasons. Firstly, to observe the transition back into a more boarding school adventure kind of tone, right? We're stepping back from fantastical threat and new darkness in the world of Harry Potter to something that is much more familiar and something that is much more comedic. Hey, Ron's going to have to wear a maroon velvet dress as his dress robes at the school. That's pretty funny. That's pretty good, actually. Just a nice moment of characterization between Ron and his mother here. But also, we're knocking again at the door of this foreshadowing. We're looking ahead to the idea that something is going to be very different about Hogwarts this year. And the way that this is layered in through our opening chapters in this book, I actually really, really enjoy. We've already had a couple of, direct references, right? We've had Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch talking about things happening at Hogwarts. Well, we're not going to make the announcement just yet, but things are happening at Hogwarts. And Bill and Charlie are kind of thinking with a certain ennui of their days at Hogwarts and how different things are going to be this year. So we're already foreshadowing what is going to come, and we're doing so really with a rather beautifully light touch here. Yes. Let me see. Maroon velvet. This is so 90s, says Heroes and Bards. That's actually very true. Yes. I mean, if you take away the lacy frill and the lacy cuffs, actually you could keep the lacy cuffs. Ron could basically be dressed for a guest spot in an episode of Charmed. Yeah, that could absolutely be happening. Yeah. It does speak to my very specific age. Of course, I graduated high school in 1996. So I have a certain fondness for that crushed velvet look. I've got to tell you, it's yeah. Just that was my experience of high school in the closing years. Yes. All right. That, I think, is going to do it for this. Maybe it says juicy on the ass of the dress robes, suggests Alice. Maybe. Just a juicy wizard. That's an Adventure Zone joke, right? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let me wrap up here. I was going to show you the last slide, but this is now sadly out of date because we don't have time this week to cover chapter 11. So next week, chapters 11, 12, and 13, we are going to look at Aboard the Hogwarts Express. Hey, For those of you who hate Draco Malfoy, we get some more Draco Malfoy next week. Then we're going to talk about the Triwizard Tournament and Mad Eye Moody, chapters 11, 12, and 13 next week. That is another evening session for us next week, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, January the 30th, 2018. I can't believe it is already almost at the end of January. That seems absurd. So that's all going to happen 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central next Tuesday night. Thank you all so much for joining me. You'll be able to continue this conversation over on the Point North forums, pointnorthmedia.com/forum. You can head on over there, register, and take part in the live conversations. Let me take just a couple minutes, and I'll see if I can run through some quick questions here. Fina asks, let me cancel the slide here. I don't think you need more thoughts on Ron's weird maroon velvet dress. Let's look at Fina's question. Fina asks, do you think wizard money is a satire of how incredibly complicated British money used to be, still is? British money now completely transparent. Pounds and pence, 100 pence in a pound. Totally straightforward, has been nice and easy since decimalization occurred in the late 1970s, except I suppose for the lingering existence of the halfpenny piece, which was pretty weird when I was a very young child in the northeast of Scotland. But yeah, the British money now completely standard. Still not using euros, because why would you use crazy European money? But I mean, I guess Britain just answered that question for me, didn't it, last year? But yes, much less complicated now, but it used to be completely unfathomable. Go and look up the Wikipedia page for old British money. It was crazy. And yes, I do think it's intended as a very direct satire. This is one of those evocations of magical medievalism that we discussed a lot, it feels like, back in the first and second books of the Harry Potter series, and which we are now we have almost left it behind. Now we have moved into a much more modern perspective on the wizarding world. So we don't generally evoke the same kind of medievalism that we did back in the first two books. But yeah, that I think is exactly and intentionally satirical. Yes. Thank you for the question. Fina. Will asks, between the tournament, the World Cup, the House Cup, and the annual Hogwarts Quidditch competition seems to be very important to wizarding culture. Do you think the world is this way so Harry can be constantly exceptional, or is this an intended design of wizarding culture? Gosh, what a really interesting question. Is wizarding culture inherently competitive? Is it more competitive than Muggle culture? I don't think it is more competitive than Muggle culture, because all of the examples that we've pulled out to date in the span of the books, this is about to change, right? We're about to do something very different with the Triwizard Tournament. But everything that we've done to date has been a direct reflection of or echo of the equivalent thing in the Muggle world, in the real world too, right? We've got intramural sports. We've got a team sport that is played at Hogwarts. It's not going to be soccer or football or rugby, I suppose. It's going to be Quidditch. It's going to be something played on broomsticks with a magical snitch. That's fine, but it's still, with allowances being made for the stress that we put on exceptionalism in the world of Harry Potter, it's still pretty much a one-to-one match, right? If there's an alternate universe fanfic out there where Harry, Ron, and Hermione are just going to a regular real-world high school, then they'll be playing some regular real-world team sport. The World Cup too kind of feels like it's just a direct analog. I'm not necessarily sure that it is more competitive, but I suppose this is why I'm hesitating. This is why I'm equivocating. There is within the frame of Harry Potter a singular stress put on exceptionalism. There is a singular stress put on heroes, for want of a better word. Heroes and villains, for want of a better word, right? Individuals seem to be far more important within the frame of wizarding society than in the real world. Is that a conscious piece of Rowling about this wizard world specifically, or is that a consequence of fantasy literature? Is that just an emergent property of all of the many inspirations that J.K. Rowling filtered into, along with her raw creativity, filtered into this act of secondary creation? I think probably a little of both. I think that storytelling in general tends to stress exceptionalism. And the reason that I'm talking about exceptionalism is that when you have exceptional characters, that the primacy of that singular conflict and primacy of singular combat is necessarily more significant. It is necessarily exaggerated. A conflict between two real-world people in the real world is necessarily going to be less dramatic than the conflict between two narratively imbued characters within a fictional frame, right? Stories work differently from the real world. That's why, generally speaking, we prefer stories to the real world. That, I think, is a consequence of the evolution of fantasy storytelling and the foundations of fantasy storytelling upon which J.K. Rowling constructed her secondary world. But also there does seem to be a specific stress put on those characters, those roles, those conflicts, those relationships within the frame of Harry Potter too, like a conscious and specific stress put on those. So I would say to the degree that it is more competitive and more, see, even there, I'm not sure that I think that it is more competitive because it is more confrontational. And it is more confrontational because we focus on and exaggerate, not to excess, but we focus on and we exaggerate heroism and exceptionalism within the frame of Harry Potter. That would be my reading of it, but by all means, head on over to the forum and discuss that. Yes, good. Let me... Here's and Bart says, I think in every boarding school novel I ever read, there was an emphasis placed on winning the lacrosse games. Yeah, no, that kind of, that stress of intramural sport is a very strong and evocative narrative hook there. That makes a lot of sense for the boarding school adventure side of Harry Potter, and it makes sense to unite that with the fantasy side of Harry Potter by making it Quidditch. But even then, we're kind of echoing the real world sense of competition and I suppose also to a certain extent collaboration, right? Because one of the things that we think about, this is one of the weird things about Quidditch. Quidditch is a sport for exceptional individuals, whether they are Harry Potter or Cedric Diggory or Victor Crumb. I think that the stress that Quidditch specifically puts on the individual is interesting because it's almost in conflict with what we usually associate with the story of team sports, which is, hey, we'll come together and we'll play as a team. This is the Mighty Ducks version, right? You can't have the Mighty Ducks happening in the world of Quidditch because the team can never cohere in the way that a real world team can cohere. You can't have, any, I mean, most sports movies have that story, right? Most sports movies are, but we put aside our differences and we came together as a team. You can't really do that in Quidditch because we put aside our differences and came together as a team. Plus we had one guy who wasn't really a part of the team and was just amazing. Like, that's not quite the same thrust and focus, which is one of the things that makes me say that, yeah, J.K. Rowling did this intentionally, that there is something there. Yes. Let me see. Okay. One more question. Leo Bill 88 asks, Alistair, would you consider the Death Eater's march with the torture of the Roberts family reminiscent of James Potter's treatment of Snape? Gosh, yes, in some ways. I think I need to think about that more. Because my initial response is to say no, because the intended purposes were so different. And I would stand by that, but I think that the intended consequence of the action springs forth from a very similar kind of us and them polar mentality, right? There is, and this goes back to our question about competitiveness and competition and conflict in the wizarding world. The wizarding world is fractured, right? The wizarding world is not unified. There are so many lines drawn across the wizarding world, which makes sense because J.K. Rowling's, one of J.K. Rowling's stated themes for this series is bigotry and prejudice, right? That makes a certain amount of sense. Different intent, similar consequence, similar cause, I suppose, is where I would end up on that question without giving it sufficient thought. I'll need to give that some more thought and maybe discuss that over on the forum too. Okay, I need to wrap this up, you guys. I need to go on about my day and go take care of some other things. Plus, I have a live class that's going out tonight. If you're taking part in the rescheduled Between Worlds class, I hope that you will join me this evening at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central for that class. If you're already registered, it's going to be a ton of fun. We're talking about Elizabethan drama. Let me also say there's going to be an announcement going out about this very soon. Let me just say that the live shows for the rest of the week are both being rescheduled. Tomorrow's There and Back Again will not be taking place tomorrow. It will be taking place on Sunday. Friday's book club, in which we're going to look at the chapters 4, 5, and 6. This is the patron exclusive book club in which we're looking at chapters 4, 5, and 6 of Madeline L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. Will not take place on Friday. It will also take place on Sunday. My schedule for this week is chaotic and there are significant technical challenges that have to be overcome. So I thank you for your patience. I will make that clear. I'll put that up on the calendar. That was decided right before I started this live session. So I will let everyone know about that, and hopefully you'll be able to join me on Sunday evening for both There and Back Again and the patron exclusive book club looking at A Wrinkle in Time. That is going to do it though for today's Dear Mr. Potter session. Thank you to everyone who joined me for the first time. Thank you to everyone who joins me every week. You all are wonderful. I hope to see you all over on the forum. Until then, thank you for listening. I will see you all. managed. Goodbye.